The tactical scout vessel's proximity alarm screamed as Elijah Holt dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Volkmar system. Before him stretched the ancestral homeworld of the Brief, a blood-red planet wreathed in perpetual twilight, its surface dotted with the bone-white spires of ancient temple complexes. Holt's crimson quantum spurs pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat as he studied the sensor readings. Orbital defense platforms, patrol squadrons, ground-based energy weapons. The vampires had turned their breeding world into a fortress, protected by centuries of accumulated military technology. He activated the ship's communications array, broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously: military channels, civilian bands, emergency networks, even the encrypted frequencies used by smugglers and pirates. "This is Major Elijah Holt. I am engaging brief forces at Volkmar Prime, coordinates 77 Mark 49. The hunt begins now." No tactical data, no strategic objectives, no coordination protocols, just location and intent, transmitted across human space like a war cry echoing through the void. Holt cut the transmission and accelerated toward the planet, his ship's engines burning at maximum output. The proximity sensors detected the first Brief patrol vessels moving to intercept, their sleek black hulls emerging from behind one of Volkmar's moons, like predators materializing from shadow. "Come on, then," he whispered, silver bullets arranged in neat rows across his console. His quantum spurs flared crimson, bathing the cockpit in blood-red light. "Let's see how well vampires fight in the daylight." The first engagement lasted 17 seconds. Holt's enhanced reflexes, honed by decades of night training and sharpened by months of focused hatred, allowed him to outmaneuver vessels twice his ship's size. His conventional ammunition found its mark with lethal precision, punching through the Brief hulls and causing catastrophic decompression that killed the vampire crews instantly. 3 patrol vessels destroyed. Holt continued his descent toward the planet's surface, hunting for the temple complexes where he knew the high priests conducted their blood rituals. Behind him, space began to fill with ships. Malcolm Vega had been running a mining operation in the Kepler Belt when Holt's transmission reached him. 3 years ago, Brief raiders had swept through his home colony of New Tuscany, feeding on the population in ritualistic displays that lasted for weeks. His wife and 2 daughters had been among the victims, their deaths broadcast across the colony's communication networks as a demonstration of Brief's superiority. Vega's mining vessel carried enough industrial-grade explosives to crack asteroids, plus the military surplus weapons he'd acquired for protection against raiders. His crew of 47 miners had all lost someone to the vampires. Family, friends, entire communities consumed to feed the Brief's blood religion. "All hands," he announced over the ship's intercom. "We're changing course for Volkmar Prime. Time to settle accounts." Vega's transport was one of hundreds, no, thousands, converging on the vampire homeworld. Merchant vessels from the outer colonies, their holds packed with weapons and their crews driven by personal vendettas. Industrial ships converted to carry military-grade firepower. Even private yachts belonging to wealthy colonists whose estates had been raided, now bristling with defensive systems and crewed by survivors who'd learned to fight. No central command, no unified strategy, just raw hatred channeled into kinetic force, scattered across the system like a swarm of angry hornets descending on a high. The constitutional right to bear arms had never been infringed in human space, and 3 centuries of frontier expansion had produced a civilian population that was armed, trained, and more than capable of conducting their own military operations when the regular forces proved inadequate. Holt's ship shuddered under defensive fire from an orbital platform as he swept low over Volkmar's surface. The landscape below revealed the truth of Brief civilization. Massive temple complexes connected by underground tunnels, their architecture designed to block natural sunlight while channeling artificial illumination in patterns that hurt human eyes to observe. This was a world built for creatures of darkness, a planet-sized crypt where vampires had dwelt for millennia, feeding on whatever sentient species they could capture and transport here for their rituals. Holt targeted the largest temple complex and dove toward it, ignoring the defensive fire that lanced up from the surface. His ship's hull plates glowed cherry red from atmospheric friction and energy impacts, but he held course with the single-minded focus of a predator closing on wounded prey. At the last possible moment, he pulled up, releasing his entire payload of conventional explosives directly into the temple's central spire. The ancient structure, built to withstand orbital bombardment, cracked and collapsed as the munitions found structural weaknesses that the breath had never anticipated. Secondary explosions rippled outward as stored blood reserves, the life essence of thousands of victims, ignited in chain reactions that turned the temple into a crematorium for its vampire inhabitants. Holt's quantum spurs flared with satisfaction as he pulled his damaged ship into a strafing run on the next complex. Behind him, the first civilian vessels were entering the atmosphere, their weapons already seeking targets. Captain Rebecca Torres commanded a converted freight hauler from the agricultural worlds of the Centauri sector. Her ship carried 32 colonists who had armed themselves after brief raids devastated 3 farming communities in their system. They'd been preparing to defend their remaining settlements when Holt's transmission reached them. "There's the real target," Torres announced to her crew as they dropped into Volkmar's atmosphere. "We're not playing defense anymore." Her ship's cargo bays had been retrofitted with missile launchers and beam weapons purchased from military surplus dealers. The colonists aboard had trained with these systems for months, knowing that eventually they would need to take the fight to the creatures that hunted their families. Torres selected a temple complex that sensors indicated was actively occupied and began her attack run. Around her, dozens of other civilian vessels were conducting similar assaults, each crew following their own tactical instincts while contributing to the larger pattern of destruction. The Brief had built their defenses to counter organized military strikes, coordinated attacks that followed established doctrine and could be predicted through strategic analysis. They were not prepared for thousands of independent operators attacking simultaneously, each following personal motivations rather than military logic. The orbital defense platforms had been designed to repel organized military assaults, coordinated attacks that followed predictable patterns and could be countered through established defensive protocols. They were not prepared for many thousands of independent vessels attacking from every conceivable angle, each following its own tactical doctrine. Commander Tamarum, ancient even by Brief standards, watched his defensive network crumble from the command center of the primary orbital station. The attacking humans showed no coordination, no strategic planning, no adherence to military logic. They simply attacked whatever targets presented themselves, adapting instantly when their initial approaches failed. "How many vessels?" he demanded of his tactical officer. "Unknown, Commander. New contacts appear every few minutes. Estimate 17,000 and rising." 17,000 ships? Tamarun's fangs extended involuntarily. "Impossible. The humans lack the fleet strength for such an assault." "Not warships, Commander. Civilian vessels, mining ships, agricultural transports, personal craft, all armed with military weapons but operating independently." Dexter studied the tactical display, trying to find patterns in the chaos. There were none. Each human vessel followed its own agenda, striking at targets that seemed to hold personal significance rather than strategic value. Some focused on orbital defenses. Others targeted specific temple complexes on the surface. Still others hunted brief patrol squadrons with the persistence of natural predators. "Where is their command ship?" he asked. "Their fleet coordination center?" "Unknown. They appear to be following the lead of a single tactical scout, the vessel that initiated hostilities." On the main viewer Tamarun, watch that same scout vessel carve through another temple complex, leaving destruction in its wake. The ship's pilot displayed a level of skill that suggested night training, but the tactics were wrong. Too aggressive, too personal, unconstrained by the honor codes that had made human knights predictable opponents. "All stations concentrate fire on the lead vessel," Tamaran ordered. "Eliminate their inspiration and the attack will collapse." But even as he gave the command, Tamaran knew it was already too late. The humans had brought their war to Volkmar Prime itself, and they fought with the fury of a species that had finally learned the true nature of their enemy. Holt's damaged ship limped between the towering spires of another temple complex, conventional rounds streaming from its remaining weapons. The crimson glow from his quantum spurs had intensified during the battle, casting everything in shades of blood and shadow. His enhanced memory cataloged each target destroyed, each vampire killed, adding to the tally he carried from Tolok. But these weren't prisoners dying under torture. These were the monsters themselves, burning in their own sanctuaries as righteous fire consumed their ancient refuges. 35,624, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of combat. "This is for you." A proximity alarm warned him of incoming missiles, but Holt's reflexes had evolved beyond human norms during his months in captivity. He rolled the ship between two temple spires, using the ancient architecture as cover, while his weapons found the missile launcher and silenced it with precise fire. Around him, the sky filled with the contrails of descending ships as more human vessels entered the atmosphere. Each pilot or crew brought their own reasons for being here, their own lists of the dead, their own need for the kind of justice that military courts and prisoner exchanges could never provide. Holt's comm system crackled with fragments of transmissions, battle cries in a dozen languages, tactical updates between crews who had never met but recognized each other as kindred spirits, last messages from pilots whose ships burned too brightly to survive their final attacks. "Is the blood storage facility in Sector 7? Requesting support at the ritual chamber, these bastards are. Tell my family I kept my promise." Conventional rounds working fine against their hulls. The chatter painted a picture of systematic destruction carried out by thousands of independent operators, each contributing to a larger pattern that no single mind had designed. It was chaos weaponized against order, individual fury combined into collective devastation. Holt smiled for the first time since Tolok, as he watched another temple complex collapse beneath sustained fire from a converted agricultural hauler. The vampires' greatest strength, their rigid hierarchy and ancient protocols, had become their fatal weakness against an enemy that refused to follow any rules at all. In the deepest vault of the primary temple complex, High Priest Arenicus consulted archives that predated human spaceflight by thousands of years. The crimson-clad figure from his race's most ancient nightmares had finally appeared, just as the prophecies had warned. "The Crimson Hunter walks among us," he intoned to his assembled acolytes, each vampire carrying the weight of centuries. "The one who would turn our own nature against us." Through the vault's observation systems, he watched human vessels systematically destroying everything his species had built over millennia of conquest and feeding. The attackers showed no interest in capture or interrogation. They simply killed, efficiently and without mercy, as if they had finally understood that some enemies could not be reasoned with or reformed. "What are your orders, High Priest?" asked one of the younger acolytes, though younger in this case meant barely 3 centuries old. Arenicus's fangs extended as he accessed the temple's emergency protocols. "Activate the blood reserves, all of them. If we must fall, we will take as many of the cattle with us as possible." Deep beneath the temple, storage tanks containing the concentrated life essence of millions of victims began to pressurize. The brief had always known this day might come, when their prey species finally evolved beyond mere resistance into something approaching their own predatory nature. But Arenicus had not anticipated the particular form that evolution would take. The humans weren't becoming vampires themselves. They had become something worse, vampire killers, specifically adapted to hunt and destroy creatures of darkness. The high priest touched the ancient scars on his throat, marks left by feeding rituals conducted when his species was young and still learning to channel their bloodlust productively. Soon, those rituals would end forever, along with the civilization that had sustained them for longer than human history. Above the vault, explosions shook the temple as another wave of human attackers found their mark. Holt's ship finally died over the 7th temple complex he'd targeted, its engines failing after taking one hit too many. He guided the vessel into a controlled crash, using the ship itself as a final weapon against the vampire structure below. The impact sent shock waves through the ancient building, cracking foundations that had stood for millennia and causing critical systems to fail throughout the complex. As the ship's power core went critical, the explosion carved a crater 50 meters deep and twice as wide, taking most of the temple with it. Holt emerged from the wreckage, his armor intact but his weapons limited to what he'd salvaged from the crash. The silver bullets in his sidearm would have to be enough for whatever came next. Around him, Volkmar Prime burned. The perpetual twilight had been replaced by the orange glow of burning temples and crashing ships. Human vessels continued to arrive, their crews adding to the systematic destruction of everything the Brief had built on their homeworld. Holt's quantum spurs flared crimson as he began walking toward the next temple complex, the one his ship's sensors had identified as the primary ritual center. Whatever high priests remained alive would be there, conducting their final ceremonies before the inevitable end. He had silver bullets for all of them. As he walked, his enhanced hearing caught the sound of massive engines approaching from high orbit. Not the improvised weapons of civilian vessels or the standard drives of converted transports, but the distinctive quantum signatures of Knight-class vessels. Holt paused, checking his armor's sensor readings. Multiple contacts approaching fast, large vessels with the energy signatures of full Knight battle groups. Knight Command had finally arrived, bringing their codes and their protocols and their insistence on civilized warfare against creatures that had never understood civilization as anything other than a convenient feeding arrangement. They would try to stop this, try to restore order, try to return the war to something manageable and honorable and, ultimately, futile. Holt's quantum spurs pulsed blood red against the burning sky as he resumed walking toward the central temple. Behind him, space filled with the blue trails of proper knights, their quantum technology casting its traditional glow as they prepared to restore their version of military discipline to this chaotic battlefield. They were too late. The convergence had begun, the hunt was in full swing, and the vampire's ancient homeworld would burn, whether Knight Command approved or not. The only question now was whether the arriving knights would try to save their enemies from the justice they so richly deserved. Holt checked his weapon's ammunition count, 7 silver bullets remaining, and continued his methodical advance toward the heart of darkness, ready to finish what 35,624 deaths had started. The real battle was about to begin. Many thanks to channel member and Pathfinder Caroline Lajoie for making this video possible. Many thanks to my channel members and Pathfinders. You all make these videos possible. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave this video a like and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. Video shares, memberships, and super thanks help the channel grow as well, so feel free to partner with this channel in that way as we grow. With that all said, thank you again for listening to the story, and thank you for your time. On the left side of your screen are some videos I think you might be interested in. I hope to see you in the next one.